What are the three key fantasy football questions facing the 2022 Arizona Cardinals as they go into training camp in the preseason? It's time to break it down right here and right now as we get another team here on Locked On Fantasy Football.
Are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. As usual, I'm your host, Vinnie Iyer. When I'm not doing this, I'm writing about NFL and fantasy football for sportingnews.com. Check out the site. We're getting you ready here for the upcoming boom that will be the NFL training camp sessions and the preseason, and we know that will count us down quickly to our fantasy football drafts. We have time, however, to take a look at all 32 teams here on Locked On Fantasy Football. That's what we're going to do here, and we've finished now three divisions in the NFC, so we're going to get on our next team here in our next division. That will be the NFC West. So we'll start with the NFC West here today with the Arizona Cardinals. We'll get through all the teams, and we'll turn our attention to the AFC. By the time we're done, we'll get to all 32 teams. So we've gotten 12 down, 20 more to go here. We'll talk about them all ahead of training camp and what are the questions we want answered in fantasy football. So a lot of intrigue around the Arizona Cardinals, Cliff Kingsbury, Kyler Murray. What are they going to give us in fantasy football? We'll explore that here. And how we've been doing it, the three key questions usually center around the quarterback, the running game, and the receiving core. And we'll do the same here with the Cardinals as we break it down. Before we do that, thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen today. We are free and available to you on all platforms. All right. The Arizona Cardinals, it's a good team to look at here because a lot of good fantasy football questions, quite frankly. Kyler Murray begins as the top question here. Now, Kyler Murray was an elite QB in fantasy just 2 years ago in 2020. Last year, in most formats, he fell to around QB 11, so borderline QB 1, almost falling out of it. And certainly, if you drafted him pretty high up there with Josh Allen, you were disappointed as Josh Allen stayed on top there near the best scorers in the league at fantasy quarterbacking. Kyler Murray really took a dip here. Part of Kyler Murray's issue was he didn't run in the same way, and he didn't get that cheat code, big numbers, and give him that high floor that we had in 2020. He insisted on being a quarterback to throw the ball around. Now, that's the issue here is where does he go with the weapons here consistently? DeAndre Hopkins is suspended for 6 games, so that is definitely a concern. Here, Christian Kirk, he had a good rapport with him as a downfield target. Kirk is gone, so you lose those two. And Larry Fitzgerald is totally faded out of this situation. So he's not coming back here for Kyler Murray. So when you look at that, it's resetting with Hollywood Brown, Marquise, better known as. Big trade with the Ravens, sending a first-round pick there to Baltimore to reunite Murray with Brown. They played together at Oklahoma as quarterback and favorite target. Hollywood had a lot of big plays, parlayed into being a first-round pick of the Ravens' speed, getting downfield and stretching the field with another mobile quarterback there, Lamar Jackson. That's Marquise's calling card as an NFL player. He's still a young NFL player making the transition to Arizona. So that provides some interest here, but it's kind of offset by the Hopkins suspension. You have also Rondale Moore that they should use a little bit more as a regular receiver here, not just a gadget player, sometimes involved with short touches in the red zone. They need to get him more involved. His speed is too good. They need him in the regular receiving core that capacity. They did bring back A.J. Green, but he slowed down. He had a few decent fantasy relevant games last year, but otherwise off the radar. So look at Kyler Murray. These targets are okay. He leaned a lot on the tight end, but Max Williams is coming off a major injury. Zach Ertz is now another year older. So Kyler Murray, I would be a little bit careful. Right now, he's ranked as the QB5. So that's kind of splitting the difference if you look at it. If he's QB2 finishing 1 year and then QB11 the next year, you'd put those two together, he'd be a little bit lower than that, around 6.5 if you split the difference there when you look at the QBs. For running QB, again, that really helps his value here, but we kind of are locked into a top four consensus in fantasy for quarterbacks here when you look at it. Josh Allen, Justin Herbert, Patrick Mahomes, and Lamar Jackson. So it really is those guys, and who comes next after. So Kyler is in that conversation, but you have Joe Burrow. You've got Tom Brady still putting up numbers. We talked about him and the Buccaneers in our previous show, how you should still feel pretty confident about him. Aaron Rodgers, I think people are down on him too much without Devontae Adams. Then you bump up players such as Derek Carr, Russell Wilson on his new team. So there's a lot of guys in the mix there. We mentioned Burrow. Deshaun Watson is available at some point. He's going to have some appeal here. Hopkins is former quarterback. So there's a lot of quarterbacks that are going to compete for that top 12 scoring output here. And I think wherever you draft Kyler Murray, I think it's going to be a bit disappointing. If you take him in the top five, it's just too aggressive. There's a lot of questions he still needs to answer. He's looking for the contract. Will that put some pressure on him? There's the durability factor you got to worry about. He's a little guy. He's been able to avoid injuries pretty well, but he can get banged up, and we've seen Colt McCoy need to take over. So there's a lot of things you do need to consider, again, in drafting Kyler Murray. So right now, it is a consensus expert ranking of QB5. I think it's a little too rich for my blood right now in going for him. I think I'd rather have him in that 8 range if I can get him 7 or 8 in QB realm. I just don't want to push too high when there's so many good values here. And that really hurts these guys in the middle where there's a drop off in the tier. And I think really, if you break it down even more, that Allen, Herbert, and Mahomes are their own tier. Jackson kind of falls into the next one. And then it's everybody else trying to figure out how they fit in the pecking order. And there's a lot of quarterbacks that are not runners that are putting up big numbers with the yardage and TDs. As we mentioned, Burrow, Brady, Rodgers, some of those guys who factor in there as well. So it's tough out there. And again, you're looking for the best value in relation to the rest of the field. So in previous years, Kyler Murray could still put up top 12 numbers here, but again, that's relative to who's scoring ahead of him. So that's what we're looking at. So Kyler Murray at number 5 is just a little bit too high for me. And I think we'll have to see. He's got to have a pretty good training camp here in preseason to inspire that he can give us more what he did in 2020 than his output in 2021. All right, so there you have a look at the key number 1 question for the Cardinals. Kyler Murray, can you trust him as a top half elite QB1 in 2022? Our answer was a soft no there. We will get into the running back question in our next segment. I do have to remind you that betonline.net is your number one source for all your betting needs and sports information. Right now, we know that NFL is cold, and we're going to wait for training camp for it to heat up, but you can look at the NFL futures, you can look at win totals. Week 1 is up there right now. So a lot of things you can get with the NFL. Major League Baseball, we know, is this hot sport in session right now. There's different things you can explore in the NBA free agency and things like that. And you can find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sporting wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. And betonline.net remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in all your favorite sports and events, including MMA, boxing, and golf. Head to the website today or use a mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, again, we will continue the show here looking at the Arizona Cardinals, and we're now going to focus in the running back situation. Now, James Conner had a massive year, very touchdown boosted there into great RB1 production last season. Now you got Chase Edmonds out of the mix. So no more Chase Edmonds. Conner was retained here. Edmonds is now with the Dolphins. They end up behind them signing Darrell Williams of the Chiefs. He was a pretty good backup and could do some third down things there behind Clyde Edwards-Helaire in Kansas City. You're still having Eno Benjamin on this roster, and Keontae Ingram is the newcomer here for the Cardinals. So Darrell Williams can cut into the work a little bit. He can have that receiving impact and change of pace back feeling in a different way than Edmonds was. So he's there. But I think they had a lot of confidence in Conner that they chose him and not Edmonds. Edmonds pretty much signed early, the first guy in free agency to the Dolphins. So Cardinals were confident in Conner. he's had some durability issues as well. So that's something you have to look back on to his days with the Steelers. But he's going to be the guy in the red zone. That's part of the reason we're cold on Kyler Murray is that Connor was just a red zone machine last year, scoring in bunches several times. And he's just a guy that, again, they trust there to pound between the tackles. That was kind of his reputation with the Steelers when he was having his best seasons, taking over from Le'Veon Bell. So remember, Connor won a lot of championships in fantasy in that year where Bell had the holdout and they turned to Connor there and he really came through. So it was a prove it kind of year for him outside of Pittsburgh. He did that in Arizona. So the touches are looking good for James Conner for sure. His usage probably won't change too much in this Kingsbury offense. He can catch passes when needed. Williams will probably cut into that a little bit. We saw him make some plays in that capacity pretty well for the Chiefs and Mahomes. So again, Connor is a guy they'll trust. The Cardinals are seen and perceived as a passing team, but they really like to run, play off Murray's ability. Connor provides that power element. And if it was more Edmonds, then you'd have Murray in the mix to handle the ball near the goal line. But this is pretty much cutting into Murray's value most, where Connor gets those opportunities. So, look, there's going to be some touchdown regression with Connor. It just happens from season to season, but he can be more effective in other ways, make up for yardage. We know basically a touchdown is 60 yards. That's kind of what it adds up to with the 6 points there. So that's something you have to look at. Where do you get those 60 extra yards? They come there. And if you're in a half point PPR league, you're also looking at 12 receptions. So that bump up as well with Edmonds gone and Williams limited. Although effective as a receiver, Connor can do that just as well as Williams. So this Edmonds move really worked out well for Connor and the Cardinals' offensive line. A little bit better run blocking anyway than pass protection. So really high on what James Conner can do here. Now, James Conner, he may not be the sexiest pick because he's not going to flash a lot, but we know he was effective. And some people might overdraft him as an RB1. I think he's more the bottom level RB1. There's a lot of workhorses that you want to feature and target earlier, but he's a fine guy to target in the middle. There's not a lot of competition there for the key touches. Get Darrell Williams. He's clearly the number 2 here. Not going to be a lot of Benjamin or Ingram behind Connor. So excited to see what Connor can do in this offense for sure without Edmonds. And that is appealing. A little bit of an underrated storyline here in fantasy football that Connor is in well positioned to keep it up here in a different way, even if it doesn't come with scoring as much in 2022. Now we know we have a big question about the receiving core. We'll get into that with the Cardinals in our final segment. So we've answered our Kyler Murray and James Conner questions. Negative on Murray, very positive on James Conner, related to each other in that production. We'll see how the receivers shake out with Murray in our final segment here. Make sure you're checking out all the great shows here on the Locked On Network, including our NBA team. We have our Locked On NBA team-by-team podcast. We're going to keep you up with the latest, biggest news in free agency, what big players are on the move, what big players are staying, who's getting supermax, who's looking elsewhere to help a team, and maybe the surprise movers that we'll see in NBA free agency. So follow our NBA team, our team-by-team podcast. They got you covered with all the biggest moves, with the latest analysis there. And don't forget about Locked On Fantasy Basketball, too. There'll be some follow-up there with our buddy Josh Lloyd here. So check out that show, all our NBA team and fantasy basketball, bringing it to you with a lot of players changing addresses here in this summer. All right, it is time to close the show looking at our final question about the 2022 Arizona Cardinals, the biggest question that we want answered going into training camp, the preseason. It is about the wide receivers. And can Marquise Hollywood Brown be trusted there as a wide receiver 1? And related to that, do we believe in DeAndre Hopkins much? Do we draft him with those 6 games missed? So Hollywood Brown has great chemistry with Murray. It's kind of like what's happening in Las Vegas out in the desert with Derek Carr and Devontae Adams reuniting from college. So they're natural chemistry. They're rekindling that bromance, so to speak. So looking at Murray and Brown, Brown is going to get a ton of targets in this offense. They want to stretch the field a little bit more. They've got the speed of Rondell Moore as well. AJ Green is slowing down. Hopkins is not going to be mixed. So when you start out early, you're going to see a lot of Brown, Moore, and Green. So That gives more a little bit of the sleeper potential there. Green, again, slowing down to me. I don't want to go there. Hopkins himself is slowing down a little bit. And how will he be after those 6 games? A lot to be determined there. So we saw some of those signs last year. He finally missed some key games because of injury. And it just happens. You just get up there. It really happened quickly for Julio Jones. It's happened for Green, contemporaries there in the same draft. In the 2011 draft, Hopkins there, his best days are definitely behind him and slowing down quite a bit. So really, when you start looking at competition, it's not just Rondell Moore, but also Zach Ertz, who developed a comfort level. Kyler Murray is brought back in free agency, and Max Williams blew out his knee, so he's working his way back while they look at the rookie Trey McBride. They're, to some, the best tight end available in the 2022 draft. So a lot of things to look at here with this team, but it is interesting what you're getting in this receiving core. I thought they would upgrade a little bit more, but you lose Christian Kirk. So essentially, Marquise Brown is an upgrade for Christian Kirk without Hopkins in the mix. And again, they're going to have Rondell Moore pick up some of that slack. So Brown and Moore are kind of the committee approach to make up for what they've lost in Hopkins. And Kirk Green is probably just going to be what Green was last year. Antoine Wesley flashes a little bit. There is some trust between Murray and Wesley, especially in the red zone, but there's not much there. Andy Isabella, that speedster that had some high expectations, he's dropped pretty far to the depth chart. He's trying to hang on, trying to make this team. You have Greg Dortch as well. He would be your sixth-string wide receiver. So Isabella is really buried here. And you have Christian Blake, a guy that played for the Falcons for a while. He's rounding out their best options right now. But what I think early, you'll have Isabella maybe be available or Dortch battling for that last spot. But you really look at it, lines up well for Marquise Brown. So look at the vacated targets, at least a good chunk of those from Hopkins from 6 out of his games last year. No, Kirk, and maybe fewer uses of 12 personnel with Williams on the mend and McBride not used there. So you figure you're going to spread the field a lot with 3 wide receivers for the Cardinals. So Brown, Moore, and Green are really going to stay out there. And again, if we fade Green quite a bit because of his age, and again, Murray didn't trust him all that much last year, you're looking at Brown and Moore doing a lot here. So Marquise Brown, yeah, we're going to go after him. We're going to temper expectations. We know he's a big play threat. Hasn't quite lived up to the expectations there as a first-round pick, but he's a little bit more than a wide receiver 3. He was a wide receiver 3 borderline. Really came on strong with Lamar last season. I thought it was his best season really overall. So he makes the transition with Kyler Murray, the familiar quarterback, keeping that chemistry alive there with the guy throwing him the ball. So you're looking at Marquise Brown being right there in a solid wide receiver 2, whether you're looking at full, half, or standard PPR. You're looking at a guy that's going to get targeted quite a bit here and out of necessity. They're going to need him, and I think you'll see him evolve a little bit, not just be the speedy deep threat, because they need him to be more at this point. Christian Kirk wasn't just a speedy deep threat. Hopkins wasn't that as well. So Brown and Moore are going to have to expand their roles a little bit playing together. So like him as a wide receiver 2, Hopkins is off the radar. Just with the 6 games missed, I don't know what he's going to be like when he comes back. I think at best he's a wide receiver 3. And I think you can look at Rondell Moore right now as a wide receiver 4 with some upside, while Brown is the number 1 here. So things to look at there. But Hopkins no higher than wide receiver 3 when he returns. Again, Moore is a bit of a sleeper only until Hopkins comes back there early this season. Brown pretty solid there with his value, where I don't think it's going to jump up to wide receiver 1 because he may not get the volume with the receptions and yards, but he's also not going to fall down there to a wide receiver 3, which he pretty much was for most of his time with the Ravens. So that lines up pretty well here with what we expect from the Cardinals. And again, the tight end will work him a little bit, and that's why I think you have to fade Green behind Brown and Moore, and Green is totally drops off when Hopkins returns because of Zach Ertz being a primary target from that position. So in summary, Kyler Murray, a little bit overrated with his ranking right now in fantasy football, in the top 5 of the QBs. James Conner, not the inflated RB1 he's going to be last year with the touchdown regression, but still firmly in that conversation in the top 12 with that potential, with no Chase Edmonds and not much in the backup realm. And Marquise Brown, wide receiver 2, but DeAndre Hopkins, a guy that you're going to fade beyond the suspension here in 2022. So there you have it. There's a detailed look at the key core questions facing the Arizona Cardinals going to 2022. If we're going in alphabetical order and we're going east to west in both conferences to cover all 32 teams, that would say our next team that we'll talk about is the Los Angeles Rams, the Super Bowl champion Los Angeles Rams. So we'll explore three key questions involving Sean McVay and Matthew Stafford and all those guys in our next show. So we'll do that next week. Thanks again for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen today. Now make your second listen. The Locked On NFL podcast, our national NFL experts and insiders keep fans dialed in with the biggest stories and latest news from around the league, because an offseason here in the NFL doesn't equal a break in the action. For this edition of Locked On Fantasy Football, this has been Vinnie Iyer. Have a great day. Have a great weekend here. Big July 4th holiday coming up. Stay safe. Enjoy it with your family. Take a break, and we will too. We'll be back at you on the flip side of that to begin our July shows. And again, we still have a lot of teams to get through, so we're excited about that. We'll get to all 32 teams here Locked On Fantasy Football. If you missed any, check them out on our archives. We now have 12 in our archives from our team previews here, and then we got one today, 3 more to finish in the NFC. So stay with us. We'll give the insight all throughout the offseason here on Locked On Fantasy Football.